shoot, Luke. It's great we finally got you on here. I love your
Yeah,
backdrop. Is that a cabin that you built?
that's my house. Yeah, I
Oh
built it.
man, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I built this part here in '96, and then I spent the summer here building it, and then I left, went back out to Alberta there for a little while, and well, heck, I didn't come back here till '05, and then I put an addition on it and had to build a barn and corrals, and everything was from scratch here. Yeah, these logs I pulled off my land out back here and peeled them up and started building, and this was my start right here. Yeah,
Like homesteading, huh? What kind of
homestead.
timber is that?
They're spruce logs. Yeah, spruce.
Boy,
Um, there's some big logs, some 18, 19-inch logs, and then we chinked in between it, right? And open cathedral style roof, got a half loft in it. The kitchen is the add-on part. Then we got a downstairs where it's a heated floor downstairs. And that's where we got the bathroom and the waterworks and our bedrooms and stuff down there. So we just heat the upstairs with the wood stoves. And then at night we go down there where it's nice and cozy. Sleep down there. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know about you, Joe, but I think that's every manly man's dream right there is to get to build something for yourself, but build a cabin like with your own hands with timber off your own land. That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. I'd love to
Yeah.
do that someday.
Oh, the first one, you work pretty hard at the wrong things, but I built quite a few now, so now it looks a lot better when we're done and takes less time. Yeah.
Well, you said working at the wrong things. What kind of things would go wrong?
Well, you just didn't know the shortcuts or how to build properly. Sure, you can read books, but the books aren't there when you need troubleshooting. So, when it comes to notching and stuff, there's a lot easier ways of doing these notches than what I was doing the first time. And so it just creates a lot more work for you. And you have settling issues after and stuff that you could prevent from building properly. And if you can look, there's some cracks in the logs. So now we put a kerf cut all the way down the top of the log to prevent any checking or cracking anywhere else on the log. So it just looks like a good solid log going through there. A lot of these little things that just helped have a better finish on what you're working on instead of just kind of shooting trial by air, right?
Yeah.
And when I went to work out in Alberta, I was I got hired on a Lazy H trail company there, and their business was they had about 120 head of horses, and in the summertime they would bring in the British military off a Suffield range, and we would teach them equestrian mobility through the Rocky Mountains. So it was one day of horsemanship, and then it was 4 days. Took a day to get out to the base camp, and then we'd be 2 days out there traveling around the mountains, and then a day to get back. So I usually had 4 or 5 wranglers working under me, and they would take them out. And my job was basically looking after herd health, making sure all the horses were shod properly, and make sure the guys knew their job and whatnot. And then in the wintertime, I went to work for a guy that was a professional log home builder. So he taught me a lot about what I didn't know, and that changed my way of building from there on in, and just made it so it just made more sense how to build. There
Yeah.
was lots to know about it. So
Yeah.
then after
Luke.
just working at it and through experience and trial and error, you get these things figured out. And, well, yeah, you can build anything with logs if you put your mind to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I got a
Luke,
log barn I built.
before we get too far into the podcast, I do want to just mention to the folks, if anyone's listening, who you are. So everybody listening, we're talking to Luke Ferrari, and you're in Saskatchewan, Canada, I believe.
Yes,
Because
sir.
this is going to be kind of a fun podcast. Because you're a guy. I mean, already people can tell by what you're talking about that you're interesting, and you do quite a few different things. But I know you through the horse world. I met you at a branding, but you do a lot more than that, and you even do some stuff with cattle and pasture management. I know, but you're joining us from Canada, and so that's even an interesting thing. A lot of guys down here speculate about how Canada, what's going on up there. So this will be a lot of fun. But for everybody listening, this is Luke Ferrari in Saskatchewan, Canada, and
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
yeah. And we've already been recording. All that stuff will still be part of the show, but I just wanted to give people a little heads up. That way they get as you're talking, now they can realize where you're talking from. Because you're not just in America where everything's just kind of necessarily easy all the time, but you guys, you got more cold weather and you got less people and more land and probably bigger grizzly bears and all that stuff. So
Well, not too many grizz around here, but lots of black bear. There's some cats, lots of deer, some elk. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
anyhow, but yeah, you were telling us about, you were working for that outfit, and you were taking care of the horses and learning how to build at the same time.
yeah, the horse thing was through the summer months, right? And then in the wintertime, you pretty well got, laid off. So I went to work for this guy, and that was kind of my start in log home building, learning how to do it properly. And so then I would just kind of work at that in the wintertime, but always go back to the horses in the summer months. And that place I stayed at for 5 years. And it was it was called the Jameson Road, just west of Cochrane. And I started there, I guess it would have been around 99, maybe 2000. And I moved into this log house there. And it had some frozen water pipes. So I had to go into Cochrane and get some supplies for it. And before I left town, I thought, well, we better go to the local saloon and just have a cold beer before we come home. And I was sitting in there with one of the local guys, and we're just having a visit, and in walked a guy by the name of Bruce Campbell. And I got introduced to him there, and he says, well, where do you live? I said, well, I live up there on Jameson Road. And he said, well, I live on Jameson Road. I said, where'd you move into? I said, that little house there is Seibel's. We got some frozen water pipes, so I had to come to town and get some supplies. But I said, I'm not much of a plumber. He said, well, heck, I can help you out with that. I know a little bit about it. So me and Bruce became friends that day. And he would come up and he helped me out. And I'd stop and visit him all the time. And he said, well, you're going to have to meet my twin brother, Peter Campbell. And I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. It wasn't a few days later, Peter come to town. He was doing a clinic in Cochrane. So he introduced me to Peter, and Peter said, well, you better come to the clinic tomorrow. I'm doing one at the Bears Paw Arena just out of Cochrane. I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Because I had been looking for a long time for a lot of answers. And, I worked with a lot of good cowboys, but it was always kind of like a closely guarded secret. They never wanted to help you out. They like to see you hang yourself, but they would never help you out. And maybe some of those guys really didn't have the answers I was looking for. So I showed up at the clinic the next morning at 8:30. The clinic started at 9. Had a little visit with Peter, and then he got started on them colts starting. He was starting some colts. And I sat back and I watched that. And for the first couple of hours, I was like, yeah, that's pretty neat stuff right there. What he was doing with them horses just was amazing to me. How he could get them to change in such short order and get them horses to relax and let down mentally. And he'd talk a lot about that. And I never heard anybody talk about the mental part of the horse before. So for me, that was from that day on, I was in with both feet, and there was no other way for me. And Peter to say, well, just show up at the clinics with your saddle. We'll get you on some colts. There's always going to be somebody that's in over their head. And sure enough, I'd show up with my saddle. It wouldn't be 15, 20 minutes into the clinic, and I'd have a colt to ride. And it would be, 3 to 4 days of this starting these colts. And by the third or fourth day, I was riding this colt in with the horsemanship horses. And to me, there was no other way to work a horse from that day on. So it took time, but I kept, phoning Peter and getting to know him a little bit. And he kept inviting me to the clinics, and I'd go every time he'd call. And eventually I'd start bringing some horses from the ranch and stuff that I wanted to work on. But that was kind of my start with Peter. And then, there was no turning back. I wasn't interested in working a horse any other way. And he introduced me to a lot of people through the years, Buck and Bill. And, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast today if it wasn't for all those guys. So I'm pretty honored to get to be here just for that,
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know about you, Joe. I don't think we'd be here either if it wasn't for those guys. At all.
Yeah, no kidding.
I got to the point where whenever Peter would call, I'd just go. Rather it's down to the Legacy in Fort Worth, Vegas, to the Pro-Am, wherever, we'd just go. And got to where I was hosting some clinics here with Peter. And he'd come up here and do some clinics. And, for the first 14, 15 years of hanging around him doing clinics, it was always colt starting and riding snaffle bit horses. And there was a lot to learn there. But later years, I wanted to learn more about the bridle horse, but he wouldn't really always sit down and visit with me about the bridle horse. He wanted me to understand what we needed to do to get to the bridle horse. And it wasn't until the last couple of years of his life that he started to really sit down and visit with me about bridle horses. And that changed a lot of things for me from there on in. And then I started to see the whole picture of it, It started to come together a little better. So
Yeah.
I owe a lot to that guy for what he's done for me and helped me with the horse, just as as there's many other people out there that can say the same. But I'm pretty grateful. We were friends, and that meant something to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely, man.
So today we work
Yeah,
at,
it's
every time we saddle a horse and ride a horse, we're working we're working on these things that I learned from him to help these horses make it. And I run 200 head of mama cows here, and I'll be calving out May and June. And to me, it's a great way to have jobs for these horses to learn. I don't own a quad, so I got to do everything a horseback. I'm sure if I had a quad, I'd probably ride it more than I should. But this way here, I got to saddle them horses. I got to go out and trail a cow around or sort off a pair. To me, that's the only way to work a cow anyway. But those horses really gain ground on that. they change inside because they got little something to think about and something to make them feel good about being successful. So to me, it kind of goes hand in hand. I do a lot of arena work too. There's a lot of work to do in the arena, but it's nice to get them horses out and just stretch out and cover some ground and excuse me, cross some creeks and trail some cows. We start them all with the rope anyway, so when it comes to getting them ready for roping, it doesn't take long, and them horses will make that transition pretty quick. But them horses learn to rate a cow pretty quick, and that gives them something to think about and gets them to kind of free up and move out instead of getting wadded up too much or too much arena work, too much pressure on them. Get them to kind of turn loose a little bit.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's I was thinking about that the other day, Luke. I think there is a lot to be said for just giving them, like you said, that sense of accomplishment and not having it drill on them so much. Because lately, with some of the horses that I've been riding, I'm like, man, I feel like we just need to like do something. Like I think the only way this is going to get better if I do something. And so I'll just pick little jobs around the farm, whether it's like, like I got to move a horse. I won't like catch it and either load it on a trailer or pony it off of a 4x4 or something to the next pasture. Like, oh, I'm going to go catch it and like pony it on this other horse, and that'll be that horse's job for the day. Or, we just need to move these heifers over here. So I'm just going to get on, even if it takes just 20 minutes. That's all we're going to do is we're going to open the gate, move some heifers, close the gate, go back home. And like that seems to go a long way for their disposition and their confidence, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it sure does. So, it sure does. You can see them change. They can mentally change just by going out and finding a job and feeling successful about it.
Yeah.
They learn that stuff too, right? They learn that they can be successful at something and feel good about it. And
yeah.
So, were you running the cattle because you had horses, or were you going to run the cattle anyway, and then you kind of found the horsemanship?
No. In 05, I had the opportunity to come back here and take over my dad's land. And he wanted to get out of the cattle. And so he sold his herd, and I started buying my own cattle. At first, I would just bring in custom cattle and graze them for some cash, generate some cash. And then I would put that money back into the infrastructure, develop some water, fencing, did a bunch of cross fencing so I could rotate those cows around and get more days out of my grass than if I just let them selective graze. And that worked pretty good. And then eventually I just started buying my own cows. And I would run a yearling program too. And now I would buy and sell, trade cows and try to make some money and keep investing into cows. And now I got, my own cow herd developed up, and it's taken me, 15 years to get the kind of cows that I wanted and the herd that I want. But I always had an interest in working cows. That's what I wanted to do. I thought that was just part of the horsemanship program. I needed that to kind of work together because I like to rope. I like to work cows on a horseback. I like to play around cutting a little bit. I like to do all these things. And if you got the cattle, there's no excuses not to do those things, right? So I'd keep some calves at home here and practice roping and practice working my horses, getting them pretty cowy. And to me, that just kind of, one kind of fed off the other, right? And now I make my living off of cows and horses, and that's what I do. But it's taken me a lot. It's been a long, hard battle to get here. A lot of hard work, and the money wasn't always there. The years. The cattle business is a volatile business, and you're always putting back into the ranch what you were making. So it seemed like, gosh, is there ever going to be any light at the end of this tunnel? But you stick in there long enough, it works out not too bad. It's a living.
Yeah.
Right? I haven't worked for anybody for 15 years, so it'd be hard for me to go work for somebody.
Yeah, I imagine.
Now, right?
So when you say you make your money off horses and cattle, are the horses part of that revenue? Like, are you selling horses, or are you, like, how are the horses part of your revenue, I guess?
Well, I do sell some horses. I ride a lot of outside horses, but I've had people bring me horses, and I'll get them trained up, shaped up, and then sell them for a percentage of that, what I sell them for. So that's been working pretty good. And plus, I've been having some people come here wanting to start colts, and so you charge them an hourly wage rate or what have you, and that kind of just all works together there. Yeah. Right now, last year I bought a wiener colt, a highbrow cat colt. And I think I'm going to get into this a little more, buying these wiener colts and then raising them up and then starting them out. Like last year, he was a yearling, and I'd get him haltered real nice, get him so I could work his feet, get him so I could trailer load him, sack him out, flag him out, do all that stuff, get him ready for saddling. This year he'll be a 2-year-old, so we'll go on with him, saddle him, get him rode around a little bit, and just keep advancing them. This way they really get good without having to miss those years of learning to get to a 3 or 4-year-old, and then somebody bringing me their 4-year-old that hasn't been messed around with much. Or they might have messed around with it and got some ugly things working in there. I kind of want to get away from that a little more. I'd like to be able to raise these horses up.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I said that's the more common version there, is people do mess around with them a little bit. They get some, like you said, some ugly things going on.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to get
right now.
I don't want to get into details about that, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it happens all the time. Yeah. I mean, Joe and I both ride horses for folks, and you try to break it to them with kindness, but you're like, shouldn't have spent that extra month you had waiting for your spot in line doing groundwork because you didn't help me at all.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of
right now I've got 2 7-year-olds I'm starting.
Yeah.
That the owner has done groundwork with them, so I completely understand. Like, they bring him to me like, oh, he's just a baby, but he's ready to get started. Well, how old is he? 7. Okay.
So they can get a little hard-minded by 7.
Oh yeah.
And but you wouldn't go about working them horses any different than you would them colts. For me, I start, no matter where they're at, I'll start from 0 to 1 with them anyway. I had a guy bring a 6-year-old here last year, and I didn't really care what he did to it. I said the horse will, it'll tell me what it knows. And I just started that horse like I would, like it didn't. It was never touched, And
yeah.
To me, that's where the only way to work a horse is to work with the horse from where he's at, not from where you're at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So. Luke, I've got a question for you, and it comes from just kind of me being naive about it because I haven't done it a whole lot, or ever really. But when you're talking about buying these wiener colts and then, keeping them on the property for, a couple years at least and getting them started and stuff like that. Um, I guess my question is it, do you feel like you've, um, can turn a profit doing that? Or is that something that like maybe you break even and you like to do? Cause, uh, you know, I, I'm kind of like everybody else. I've got horses. Like I buy weanlings and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to start this one and start this one. But I I've never made money on one. But then again, I think lot of times, bloodlines and the quality of training and the right buyer, because horses are like different than cattle, right? Because there's a cattle market, and a horse is worth whatever one person is willing to pay for
Right.
the horse, right? So I'd be curious to get your perspective as a young guy, as me being a young guy, kind of getting into this. And quite truthfully, I would aspire to do kind of what you have done a little bit with your life, where you've got some cattle and you got the horse deal going, and like you've kind of taken over the family property. Like I'm seeing a lot of parallels with the situation I'm in. So I'm I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, and how, if you're making a profit on that, how that works.
Yeah, it takes a little more time, but at the end of the day, you have better results, especially if you got the bloodlines. You got to buy the right horses to fit what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Rather be jumping horses. Well, you got to get into some warm bloods. You want cow horses, you got to get into the right quarter horses. Um, and yeah, I think you can't help but make a little money at it, all right, if you put the right time into these horses and get them performing in a way so that when you go to show them, these things are right on, where you can pick up their leads left to right. You got nice stop, nice handle, work a cow, rope a cow, all these things, and that horse never bobbles ahead, and everything's right on and smooth. You're going to get people interested in your horses, without a doubt.
Are you currently taking horses and showing them, Luke?
I haven't been. No, that really hasn't been something that I've been working at. I just go to these ropings, pro am,
And
and there's a roping coming up here,
yeah,
and my horses get seen that way pretty good. Now, would I like to go do some more showing? Yeah, I wouldn't mind, but that takes a lot of your time, and you got to have the equipment to go down the road, and have the places. For me, I'm kind of out here a little bit, so I do have to do quite a bit of traveling to do that. But do I want to get there? Yeah, I think I'd like to do some of that someday when I get some of this other stuff leveled out. Yeah. Right now,
yeah,
I guess you could say I'm preparing for later. So when I go to do that, I'll be ready. But these horses that I'm bringing up, I'm starting to get a bit of a name for putting out some good horses. And eventually, you don't have to go looking for those clients. They'll call you up. You got anything coming up this summer that you're working on, or what have you? And if they find out what you got for horses, they want to know how they turn out. Let me know. Give me a call when you're ready to sell it. You know, so it takes time to develop that, and you have to make sure that when you're showing it, that it's right on, like you say it is, because you know how easy it is to say one thing and go out and show the horse, and it kind of falls apart, and then people will make excuses for the horse's trouble, but really the horse didn't have any trouble. You just didn't do all your homework. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I think so.
So it's important to get these horses right, and and you'll know when they're right because you'll be able to do anything on them and not have any trouble. Where them horses will be smooth through their transitions when they're whatever you ask them to do. And they're united with their feet. They got them reins and your legs connected to them feet, and you can whatever you want to do. Wherever you want to put a foot, you can, or you need to be here in this position. You got control of the hindquarters. You can do all these things with the horse. You'll know when it's ready and when you can start putting that out there. So it takes a lot of work and it's small increments of time to get there, but you have to work at it. And it takes a lot of time and dedication. So I spent a lot of years for me learning it. And a lot of horses, I feel sorry for them horses now in my life because they had to put up with me learning it. But it was because of that hard work and some of the ugliness that I've seen in them horses that changed the direction I was going. And of course, Peter Campbell was a big influence on that. And then, once you start seeing all the mistakes you're making and the changes to the good that you can do, it just changes everything for you. You're just so much more confident when you go to do something because you understand that it's right, And there's lots of people out there that are trying it, and yeah, they're blowing smoke. They're pulling the wool over people's eyes, and but at the end of the day, it'll come back and haunt them later. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Luke. Along that line, I wanted to ask you this question while you're talking about that, because you sounds like you're pretty particular about your horsemanship and just even the way your life is arranged. So I imagine you have some standards for yourself for where you want a horse to be at before you sell it, and even probably standards for the buyer.
Absolutely.
If that's true, like what are some of those standards? Because I'm sure that'd help a lot of other people, certainly us.
Well, the standards are to get them horses right mentally with whatever it is you need them to do so that they can handle all the pressure that comes at them. And the more things you can figure out to work at with your horse, rather it's just going to a fence and picking up a tarp and waving it around to crossing a creek to being able to work the flag or work other colts with the flag off that horse. There's so many things that you can come up with to help them horses get to where they can handle just about anything somebody puts at them to a degree. But when I get a horse where I think it's ready for somebody, this horse ought to be able to, you could shoot a gun off its back and the horse will just sit there and wait. And when that horse is waiting mentally for you, to me, that's when it's right. To me, that's when it's waiting for you for the next job or the next cue or the next task. Then you know that you're on the right path. But there's so many things in there to work on and to look for that you can't just say, well, I need this, or I need this horse to be able to stand there when I get on it. There's so many things that when I pick up on them reins, them horses they're ready. When I ask it to move, it just moves. I want to back up, I'll back it up. And this thing, people won't even really see me asking to do anything, but that horse is feeling it. You may not see it, but that horse will feel it. And to me, whenever I got that horse so I can put a foot wherever I want, have control of all four quarters, and that thing is soft from the third vertebrae of the pole through the neck, through the withers, right down to the loins, and that thing is right on. To me, that's when that horse is ready. So when someone says, well, we put 20 days on it, sure, but I don't know if it'll be right. I'm not going to get all these things working in 20 days. Well, how long do you think you should have it? As long as the horse thinks I should work on things. When the horse is ready. So that's kind of how I go about that. I don't put a time on it.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. And what about the owners, the new potential owner? Do you?
Well, they better show up.
Customers
better show up, because I've had owners come here, drop their horses off, and then you don't see them. It's like they play this disappearing act. on you. So I'll call them up and say, well, you know what, you guys, I'm gonna start working this horse tomorrow. I said, show up to see what it looks like at the beginning. So they'll come over and we'll work the horse and I'll show them what it looks like. And then they'll go away and then they'll come back a week later and then they'll see where the horse is a week later. And then I keep encouraging them to come any chance they can to learn how I'm going about working these horses, because I'm going to work with you just as much as this horse almost, maybe more, to help you understand it. The horse is right on. The horse will make it. But if you don't have some of these tools in your tickle trunk, you're not going to make it with this horse. You'll find trouble. So I explain that. I talk about that a lot. And people come and they get involved, and that way they get to learning what I'm talking about at the end of the day when they show up to pick the horse up. So it's all part of, you better hang around, because otherwise I'm doing this all for naught. Because if you go back to your old practices, you're not going to get along with this horse and you get bucked off, it'll be your own fault. The horse was already right on. You know what I mean?
So Luke, what about then, like with these sale horses you're talking about, and you have these people reaching out to you as potential buyers, and you know they haven't been a part of the process. Are you vetting your buyers in any type of way?
I try to, but you got to.
Yeah. And what's the vetting criteria for
Sorry?
them? What's the vetting criteria? Like if you know, if I give you a call and you don't know me from Adam, and I say, hey, Luke, I hear you got nice horses. I'm looking to buy one. Next horse you got coming up. What would you want to find out about me before you sold
Well,
me
I'd
a
want to
horse?
know your background a little bit, what your intentions are with the horse, what you're looking for in a horse, where you want to go with it, and what you want to do. And I'd like you to come over and show me where you're at with your horsemanship, and to see if this horse is going to work for you or not, because this horse may not work for you, you know. So if you can come over and show me how you ride, or you know, show me what this horse is going to do for you, then I'd be interested in maybe making a sale or talking to you about selling you the horse. But I'm not just going to sell the horse to just anybody, because that's just no way to go about it. Because if they're not on the same page as you, I guarantee you'll get that horse back, or they'll call you up with some trouble that they don't understand about, and that can make for bad business. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to stay away from that.
Because in the meantime, they're talking about this lousy horse they
Right.
got from Luke, even though it's not the horse that's
Right.
the problem.
And for me, if the horse stays here, it's okay. There's lots of work to do. I know I'll just keep getting it better until the right guy comes along. And it's okay to keep these horses a few years, because then they just get more mentally prepared for to put up with a lot of other things that maybe somebody else is offering, and get by, and in substitute of their mistakes. Where a young horse could really get confused and bothered and upset real quick by the wrong field, and that can really lead into trouble quick. And sometimes that's hard to get that to come back. Depends on what they got going on, but sometimes that trouble can stay in there and surface if it's in the wrong hands. Maybe I'll get it back and get it right again, but that doesn't mean that problem's not still in there, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at that.
Yeah, like Luke, one of the most cringy kind of scary business models that I've heard are being around this horse industry and hearing somebody start putting a schedule on, you know, horses they're going to buy, when they're going to be ready, and when they're going to sell them, and for how much, and then the next group they're going to bring in, and even some friends. And you know, I don't have a ton of experience at this. I'm a baby at this horsemanship stuff, but I've got a lot of friends, people like you know, and others
You're
that
around the right people.
that are telling me a lot of stuff. So I'm listening to them, and the little bit of experience that I have, boy, when I hear an idea like that, I mean, I don't want to sound just like totally derogatory and mean to my friends that are saying those things, but I can't help but say, man, I just can't get on board with that. It doesn't sound like a good idea, because when
Yeah.
you start putting time limits, especially like an idea like, well, I want to sell six horses every year. I want to start and sell 6 horses every year. I'm going to do 3 in the first part and 3 in the second part, and then it'll make this much money. And you're just like, man, really? And you're just starting out doing horsemanship. And no offense to that guy, you know, necessarily, but just you want to see them succeed, and that doesn't sound like success at all. And that's a cringy thing to hear, especially when it's your friend, because now you really care, and you really have to say, man, I don't think that's a good idea at all.
I like to change the topic
Yeah.
when that happens.
Yeah. No, I totally with you. But then when it's like a friend that's someone close to you, you don't want to like beat a dead horse, but you do want to make sure they know down the road that you were one of the guys who were saying, no, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, you didn't pat him on the back and say, yeah, man, try it out. Go for it.
Right?
I
Yeah,
mean, I
too
guess you got
many
to
of
let
that.
people fail,
Too
but
many people pat them on the back and say you're doing great,
exactly.
but that's really not the answer. You're not being truthful, right?
Yeah. And
So,
it's easy to pat people on the back. My mom's Canadian, so I'm half American, half Canadian. So I've got a little bit of that polite streak running in me. And I know how often I tell people, oh, no, you're looking great, looking good, you're doing fine. So anytime someone tells me I'm looking good and doing fine, I don't believe it for a second. You
right.
know, I gotta kind of spoon feed myself some good comments every now and then just to feel good about myself. But other than that, I don't. It's hard
Well,
to believe any of that stuff.
my friend Peter used to say, "You leave your ego at the door, and in here, we got a little easy bake oven, and we serve up some humble pie, and we serve it one piece at a time around here." You might have heard that before.
Not put like that. I like that. I've definitely heard the check your ego at the door, or check your ego at the arena gate. You know, when you go in,
Sure.
just leave it all behind.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah,
them
Luke.
horses have a way of humbling you up, you know.
Yeah,
Just when
I
you
never
think you're,
met.
just when you
I got a
think you're
little
King
delay. I'm sorry.
Dingaling, just when you think you're King Dingaling, them horses will humble you up. When you go around there trying to show off what you know, I guarantee you there'll be a time where them horses will paw you on the head, or buck you off, or kick you, or bite you, and you'll find some humble pie that way. It's a hard way to do it, but I've learned that if I can just go about my business and work my horses, people see how the horses look when you're riding them, and they come to you for the questions. It always pans out a little better for you because you're not going around blowing your horn, and they're not surprised if they find out that you got something to offer the horse and you get something shaped up. Then it's a good warm fuzzy feeling for them. But if you go there telling them what they don't know and how they should go about it, they're not going to listen, and they're not going to want to see any part of your business. So there was a time when I was first started with Peter, I couldn't wait to show this stuff to people. But then I got to learn, and not everybody wants it. Not everybody wants to hear it from you, right? So I got to learning that, yeah, I better just focus on me and what I got to offer this horse. And when I'm done riding this horse, if it ain't showing what I'm working on, then I ain't doing my job. It'll speak volumes. So I've created more interest that way than me going around blowing my horn. And I know for sure that your results will turn out better too when you go to working on something.
Yeah. And that's kind of like that old saying, be the change you want to see in the
Sure.
world, right? Like if you want to inspire people to be better with their horsemanship, if it's just like, maybe your local area. The answer isn't by putting up flyers at the feed store saying, "Hey, I'll help you with my horsemanship." It's, "Oh, well, I'm going to try to be as good as I can." And then when folks see me, the ones who are paying attention will be like, "Oh, maybe he knows something I don't." And it doesn't have to be you individually. I think anyone could do this. And if I imagine you're probably the same way, Luke. Like if I had my druthers, everyone who owned a horse would be working at their horsemanship as hard as I am or
Right.
harder, right? And it's not the case. But maybe you can inspire a couple people to change by them seeing, like, wow, Luke's gotten a lot better since I saw him 5 years ago or something
Right.
like that,
Because every day you work at a little better, being a little better. But you think about where you were
Absolutely,
5,
man.
10, 15 years ago compared to where you are now. And then you figure out if you've been working at it or not. Because what I was 15, 20 years ago, it's not who I wanted to be. But I didn't know where to find the answers. And I always knew there was a better
Mm-hmm.
way, but I just couldn't find that one guy that could help me until I met Peter. And then he changed everything for me. And, you know, I learned a lot from that guy. And he introduced me to the right people. And I'm forever in debt to him, but it's up to me now. He's gone. It's up to me now to carry on what he taught me and to keep learning from the horse. And I'll just keep working at that. And it's not a popularity contest for me anymore. It used to be. But now it's about how I can do the best I can with my horses. So when I go to these ropings and I go to roping on something, my horse is like my feet and it moves when I need it to move without bobbling its head or getting bothered and troubled or stepping on itself or can't move out of the way of the rope or something like that. That's just trouble. I want to get away from all that trouble, so I want my horses prepared for all that before I even go show up. You ever hear anybody say, practice at home what you want to do before you go out in public and do it? But to me, I want my horses right on before I go to a roping and show my horses. And I think that really stands out because a lot of people would like their horses to behave like that, but are really struggling to get them because once they pressure them horses up, when you're just riding around, la-di-da, trail riding, that's one thing. But you'll find out what your horse knows once you start pressuring them up and things start to speed up a little bit. You'll find out who's got the goods. And for me,
Yeah.
it has to be at all levels. Doesn't matter if it's running one down out in the pasture to rope it. We don't like to do that anymore. We like to gather those cows up and roe deer them up and ride through them and rope what we need to doctor. But sometimes with them yearlings in that wide open area, you might need to run one down. So if your horse is right on to run one down, it's not a big deal. You just kind of follow it up until it blows a little air out a little bit and slows down, and you just lope up to it and rope it. But all these things work together, right?
Yeah. Well, I will say this, Luke, and knowing you and then hearing you talk more today, it's pretty obvious that you're a humble guy in a good way. So I'll give you a compliment. You also kind of had to be in the right frame of mind and be searching on that day when you went to that clinic, because someone else could have, gotten help with the plumbing and then met some new friends and then went to the clinic and said, well, boy, that guy's got some neat
Mm-hmm.
tricks. And then that was the end of it. And then go
Yeah.
on. So part of it was on you to have the awareness and be in that kind of searching type of mind frame to be ready to realize the journey ahead of you. And so I think it's important for people to remember that not everyone's like that, and uh, that's says a lot about you as a
Well,
person.
thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me because I've worked hard at it. And ever since I started my first horse when I was 12 years old, and there was nobody around to help me, and you just did what you could by some of the magazines you would read or some of the books you would read or you'd watch some of them cowboy shows and you thought that was how you go about it. But you didn't know any other way. And then when I went out west, I looked for that. I seen a lot of good horsemen, but they were still really hard with horses and kind of archaic about some of their ways. And I'd look in them horses' eyes and I knew I seen fear and scaredness, and I knew there had to be something else. And I went to a few clinics, reining clinics and stuff like that, but it wasn't my style I was looking for, and it wasn't the kind of horsemanship that sure, maybe I could build into that reining stuff someday, but they weren't talking about how to get there.
Yeah.
And so when I met Peter, I was excited to go to the first clinic. I wasn't sure what he had to offer, but I was excited. He looked pretty punchy. He looked like he might know what he was talking about. And when I went there, I knew in the first couple of hours that, I got to hang around this guy a little more. And that was the direction I wanted to go. Yeah.
Boy, Luke, you talking about that kind of reminds me of my childhood, because I always liked horses, and my dad would give me little horse books and stuff like that. And I remember he gave me this one book. It was called like How to Train a Horse, like A to Z kind of, by some Californian guy. And I think he worked with quarter horses, and they had it in this book, in pictures from the front to the back. You catch it, you snub it up, you sack it out, you tie it down with a Scotch hobble, you get the saddle on there. So that it had the whole thing worked out to the end, and then it showed you how to, get them, how to, tie down calves, and you have a pulley that backs the horse up when you're on the ground. I mean, all the mechanical crap, we've all seen, and it's amazing. It's in this book, documented, and all that left me with was like this feeling, probably much like a kid being raised in Spartacus or something. And you thought, well, I guess I'm going to be a soldier someday. I hope I'm tough enough, And that's all I could think was like, well, someday I want to work with horses. I hope I'm tough enough when I get there, because it looks like a lot of battle. And I don't remember necessarily thinking like this is super wrong at the time, because I thought that's all there was. But I was daunted. I was like, I hope I'm tough enough, because this looks like a lot of fighting, like on a daily basis.
There you are. Carry on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But, and so.
You last I heard you say you didn't think this was super wrong.
Oh, yeah. Well, this thing will still have recorded what I said, but I'll repeat it for you. It'll be in the podcast in the end. But, yeah, I didn't necessarily think it was so wrong, because that's all I knew. I just thought, well, I guess that's like they do in the Louis L'Amour books. You got to be tough. You got to cowboy up. Right. But I just kept thinking, gosh, I hope I'm tough enough to be able to do it. Like the movie Hondo with John Wayne, right?
Right. But at the end of the day, you still feel empty.
Exactly. Empty with a bunch of sores all over, because you've been trying to just stick on this horse, get bucked off, get on again. And so what a relief to run across this kind of horsemanship, not only to see peace, but then the thing you've wanted to do since you were a little kid was in reach. And instead of training to be a soldier every day, you're kind of doing the opposite. It's like that. There's that quote. It's it'd be better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I think growing up, I was kind of that gardener at heart, but it looked like I was going to have to go to war. And instead, now it's like you're learning to be a warrior, but you get to work in a garden, and you get to be a warrior over your feelings and your emotions, and then take care of the garden. And so many people are still trapped in the opposite world, and that's probably why you have, I think they say alcoholism is among, the worst abused in horse training, that line of work. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's tough if you don't have any relief from that system, and you want to work with horses. You got to drink or you got to do something to try to get by every day.
Yeah. And you never get to eat them fresh vegetables out of the garden.
Yeah, yeah. You
Right?
don't get to eat, kill and eat what you take home. And so even if you're riding
You're
horses
too,
for
you're
other
too
people,
busy fighting weeds.
hell yeah. And so even if you ride horses for other people, or you do raise your own colts and sell them, or you just ride a horse for fun, whatever it is, you have this, there's like you're spiritually fed in a way on a
Right.
daily basis through your job. And
It has a way.
versus being deteriorated at on a daily basis because you just kind of hate your life.
Boy, did you hit that on the head. And that's what gives you that sense of accomplishment, is having these tools and knowledge to work at something. To already know the end result is a pretty rewarding thing. Where, before all this happened, I was just working at something. I didn't know what. But I needed to work at something. And it didn't always turn out very good. But now in my life, I can see the end results almost before it gets there. Because you know that with this way of working a horse, that there isn't a horse out there that doesn't understand it. And now there's some tough horses. I've worked with some tough horses. Peter used to get me on some pretty rough horses. But it didn't take long, and you see them horses change mentally. And when they let their head down, lick their lips, and that eyeball twerk back, and their ear flicks, and they're shaking their head trying to get that trouble out, you know you're gaining ground on these horses, and they're changing inside and changing mentally. And for a horse that tight and that bothered and upset to make that transition in a short time like that was pretty neat for me. And you could go about working these horses in a way when they get to trusting on you like that. Sure, they're sensitive, but if you're aware of that sensitivity, you can really make that work into the good. But if you don't know anything about that sensitivity and how that horse is thinking, you can sure find trouble. But these horses no longer wanted trouble than you did. But once they got to understanding and separating that, and it felt good to them, and they started to understand it's about moving their feet and working with their mind and their body and getting them to operate their body through a feel, they change, and that's pretty rewarding for that horse. Therefore, it's pretty rewarding for you. And I've made some really good horses out of some of them tight, bothered horses that really come out good.
Yeah. You were just talking about making progress, and I think we can have a pretty skewed idea of what real progress is. And I was talking to Bill about that this morning, because this week what was kind of on the top of my mind was reevaluating what I think progress is with the horses I'm working with. And I caught myself a few times this week where I was like getting ready to do something else, do more, and then I remembered something Bill had told me at the beginning of the week, and it helped me kind of stop myself and think about it and go, you know what? I've already made some progress. I haven't worked with this horse an hour so that I can now make a little progress in the next 15 minutes. The whole hour was progress. That's why it was calm and it was peaceful. I need to just quit. Like before I do what I think is the progress, which is really just going to be screwing him up.
Right.
Like I thought I was preparing him for an hour to take him to the next level, when the whole next level thing, that was where things were going to go south. And I had already made progress. And
he was already trying to absorb it.
Right? Yeah. I guess, as a human, I wanted to feel something. I wanted to feel like I went up a notch. But the horse already, like the fact he was still peaceful and we had gotten through an hour of working together, like that was progress to him. But I was doing it for me, not for him. And my progress wasn't focused on the right object.
But with time, Ben, that'll go away. And you'll understand more that it's not about me. It's about how the horse is gaining time, how the horse is gaining knowledge. and when it's enough. You can work on them horses and really turn them into trouble. You can work on it too much to where they turn almost into a block of ice. And if we keep knocking on them, they'll just get harder and harder. But if we can let them thaw out and think about things, well, heck, the next thing you ask them to do, they'll make it because they had time to think. And it's not so much overwhelming them that they're allowed to process what it is you're asking of them to do. And that's all them horses want, is to understand what it is you're asking of them. What is it that you want from me? And it's your job to say, well, I just need you to move that foot today. Or I just need you to back up a little bit today. Or step them hindquarters over. Or bring the front end across. And if you know that horse is really struggling at something, and you got it working at it until you feel that you're presenting it in a way that he can make it, because it's always the darkest moment before dawn. And when that horse sees the light, that's the time to say, okay, you made it, buddy. And then eventually them horses learn to learn. They learn to follow that feel or to move away from pressure or move towards a release, right? They get that separated pretty quick. So the next thing you know, your building gets better and quicker with things later because the horse is learning to follow a feel more and get it down to the feet. Yeah?
Yeah. And I think where I'm at, I'm just starting to think about that and get aware of that in the moment when I'm working with the horse. And Joe and I talk about this all the time. You can read the books and we can talk about it on podcasts and whatever, but the rubber hits the road when you can remember that stuff in the moment when you're actually working with a horse. Sometimes it's not easy to take those lessons with you to the arena.
It takes time. It takes time to get that figured out because we get excited about working on something. And then we want the horse to get it figured out faster than we give it time to. And so there we find ourselves maybe overdoing something or working too hard at something or taking the wrong approach about it. And sometimes just letting things thaw out and rest a little bit gives you time to think of another way to approach it. And sometimes that other way is a little better. And maybe it gives them a little chance to find a way out. So,
one thing, that makes sense. Joe and I, we never met Peter Campbell. That was before we came along. And could you talk a little bit more about what he was like and what he was like to ride in a clinic with and learn from and his sort of teaching style?
Well, I got to know, I knew Peter for 17 years, so I got to watch Peter evolve over the years. And at first, he could be a little caustic with the people. And he never hesitated to say what was on his mind when it was in the arena. And he'd always say, in here, it's all business. When we leave this arena, we can be friends. But in here, it's all business. And he was all about the horse. And he just wanted to see you learn it and follow what he was talking about and exercise what he was saying. And later in life, it wasn't until the last few years did I see him switch it over to the people, to try to help the people understand it more and bring it across in a way so that he could break it down a little better and get you to understand it instead of showing you and expecting you to learn it. He did a better job near the last few years of really breaking it down and talking about it and saying why it's like this or how you go about this or why you would do this. And, what you were looking for in your horses and really talk about it. And that's when I seen, where people would really start to get interested when he was doing that. Because I'll be honest with you, there was people that would come to the clinics and, do some dumb stuff, and he'd get a little hard on them, and they'd end up leaving crying or whatever. And he'd say, what I'm dishing out is nothing compared to what this horse can dish out. This horse thing, it can kill you. So I suggest you pay attention, try to follow what I'm saying. I'll keep you safe, and I'll help you through the trouble. And I think it was the later years of his, clinical life that he was really starting. Like, he had the horse mastered, but I think he was really starting to figure out the people near the end, and was really, really being able to bring it across in a way so you could break it down and understand it. But for me, he was my friend, and so I learned a lot just sitting around the table, or going down the road with him, or just having a visit like we are. And we talk a lot about these things, and I learned a lot just visiting with him, outside the clinics. But you'd lay in bed and you'd think about all this stuff, and sometimes the light would come on and you'd get excited about the next day going and working on it. But for him, he just had a real smooth way with them horses, and that spoke volumes to people. But it wasn't until the later years that people started to really listen instead of being intimidated. If I could break that down.
Yeah. That that really reminds me of the podcast that we did with Buck Brannaman, and I talked to him about just learning to deal with the folks in his clinics and stuff, and the comment he made was how people were no different than horses. It's all in the presentation, right? And that's kind of what your story reminded me of. There was maybe he learned over time that if he presented this message to people in a little kinder way, if he didn't come, like you said, come down so hard on them, they'd be more apt to stick with him and try to actually learn, because kind of letting someone have it, maybe you are telling them the truth, but letting someone have it and then they leave the arena crying, that's like no different than getting way too firm with a colt and just having them mentally come unwound. And then it's like, well, you might as well just kick them out and try again tomorrow. Except the person has the option of never coming back. So
yeah, it's like the horse. You pressure the horse up too much, they're going to cut out on you mentally. They're going to look for someplace else to go mentally. It's the same with the human. But the human's even more sensitive. They get their feelings hurt. And instead of, some of those people could have gained some ground if they would have just said, okay, I understand, I got to listen more. Or, okay, I'm working at the wrong things. But people can sometimes have a way of getting themselves braced up towards it. And when they get upset, then they lose out on the information they could have gained. So with their temper and their attitude, they cut out, and then they never gained any ground anyway. So then they go around, they'll badmouth Peter or whoever because of that. But in reality, if they would have kept going what they were doing, that horse could have killed them. That horse could have hurt them. They could have found some real trouble. And when Peter would get boisterous like that, it was because he cared. It was because he didn't want to see you get in trouble. He didn't want to see the horse get hurt. So sometimes that would come across a bit rough. Hell, he'd knock on me too at times. But I knew that it was for good reason. And he wouldn't be like that if you weren't stepping out of line or you weren't doing something silly that could get you hurt. That might come across like that, but he never really meant it to come across like that. So that's why I say the last few years he was really working on that. He had the horse figured out, but he was really working at the people near the end. And I really seen him gain some ground with that.
Yeah. Because helping the people is ultimately how you help the most amount of
Sure.
horses.
Sure. Like he used to say, the horse is good. You can get the horse good, but it's the people you got to work on. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. And you make a good point. There are a lot people are in a lot of ways a lot more sensitive than horses, because they have egos and they have all these things that they feel like they deserve or whatever. So, obviously there's a lot of ways that horses are more sensitive than people, but that's a good point, Luke. That's a good way to
words
look at
don't hurt the horse. Words really can hurt people, right?
it. Yeah.
So, by saying the wrong things to the wrong person at the wrong time, you really get that person upset. But the horse doesn't operate like that, of course. Horse operates through feel, time, and balance. So you can work with that all day long. Where the people, if they get their back up to you, sometimes it's hard to bring that confidence back. They'd rather just cut out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a much more appealing
Yeah,
option.
they'll go look for somebody else that's got a unicorn and fairy dust and makes them feel real good about what they're doing, and they'll stick with that. But Peter, he was black and white. Here it is. Here's the goods. Pay attention, you'll learn. He wasn't going to go pat you on the back for no good reason. You had to earn it. And I admired him for that.
Yeah.
Made you better. Made you a better horseman. Made you a better person.
That's probably why this horsemanship journey developed such a strong bond among friends, because even like that kind of stuff hurts my head to think about, because before you can even start working with people, you have to have a willing pupil there in front of you, and you can't like lock people in a pen and work with them once a day, and you can't force them to come do it. So
Can't
like
shove
they've
it down
got
their
to
throat.
first they
right?
got to show up of their own will and want to learn something, and then you better hope
That's right.
that you can learn to work with them in it. So I'm glad I don't have to worry about that in my stage, my career. But for sure, the other friends out there, like both of you guys right now on the podcast, it draws you closer to your friends because they're also working on this of their own will. And not only are you showing up of your own will, but you're working hard on yourself, trying to get rid of the problems that you have that kind of hold you back from being humble or being less resistant to the process, and it makes you
Well, at the end,
much more appreciative of your friends who do this as well.
yeah, because it's got to come from here. Got to come from the heart, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just putting in time, maybe wasting somebody else's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
remember
you guys
Kip
are on a
Fladlin.
good journey. You guys are on a
Yeah.
good journey. You got Billy Money there, and you got Buck, and you guys got the right people around you. You'll make it. I know you will.
We're
Good
thankful
opportunity.
for the guys we know. But I remember one time Kip Fladlin said that
Absolutely.
about his time. He said, "Gosh, I'll work with somebody for free if they're trying to learn, and someone who
Sure.
doesn't really want to learn and they're going to waste my time, they couldn't pay me enough to spend an hour with them." Because he said, I think however old he was at the time, he said, I'm at the point in my life where I don't want to waste another minute. So you
Right.
couldn't pay me to do something I don't want to do, and I'll do something for free for somebody who's
Yeah, well,
interested.
Kip's right. You know, him and I are probably close to the same age, and heck, we think about doing things better every day and making things right and doing the right moves because we're not getting any younger and we're not getting any cattier. So we need to avoid a lot of these troubles. And if you're willing to hang around and you got some interest, heck, I'll be there all day, just like Kip would be, you know. But if you got no time and you're just there to maybe impress somebody else or to waste my time, well, nothing good comes out of that anyway, right?
Yeah.
These kind of dead ends. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No kidding.
you guys carry on with your journey. You're on a good path.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that, Luke. It doesn't make it any more frustrating or any less painful, but I appreciate you
it.
saying that.
Yeah,
I
no,
get it.
sure. We'll keep
There'll be
swinging.
times where you'll be crying inside, right? Trying to figure
Oh,
stuff out.
there's times when I cry outside.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
there'd be times where I'd be working on something and I'd phone Peter and put on the little headset and he'd guide me through something over the phone. And I'm like, well, where else can you get that in life? Where else are you going to
Yeah.
get that opportunity? So, I mean, I would just feed on it every chance I could. I soak it up like a sponge, you know. So,
So what was because I'm like Ben, I wasn't super familiar with uh Peter. What was his background? Where did he kind of uh kind of start learning this deal, and then how did he end up setting up shop near you?
well, he first started out as a kid at Warner's in Banff, and he worked for Ron Warner, taking people out in the mountains. And then he worked for. Then he got on with the game with the Parks Canada, working colts for Parks Canada, and he did that for I think a couple of years, and then he worked on the wine glass out of Cochrane for a while, and then he packed it up and went down to California, and it was he heard about Ray and he'd go to some of Ray's clinics and stuff, and then it was through the clinics that I think he heard about Tom, and then he looked Tom up, and that was kind of where he got his start, was through Tom. And he brought Tom up to Sundry, Canada, to do a clinic, and that was kind of how he got started. It was with Tom. So when he got on the clinic trail, heck, he didn't look back. He dedicated his life to that, and that's what he did. Traveled all over.
So was he living in Alberta or near you,
No,
or like
no, he
where
was
was
out
that?
there. He grew up in Banff, and then he moved to California, and he lived out in California for quite a
Okay.
few years, and then they bought that place out in Wyoming at the Hat Creek,
Okay.
and heck, he was there for quite a few years at the Hat Creek, and he got a nice little ranch out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess it was his brother that was there near you, but he didn't necessarily live near you when you met him.
Who, Peter or Bruce?
Yes. Bruce, so my understanding was Bruce lived near you
Yeah,
because he
Bruce
was
lived
your
on the
neighbor
Jameson
and
Road
helped you
where
out
I
with your
lived. That's
plumbing
how
and
I
stuff,
met him.
right?
And we lived maybe 3 miles apart.
Gotcha.
And
But then Peter was down in
Peter
the
was down
States.
in Wyoming at that time, and that would have been around 2000. I think he just moved to Wyoming from California. But Bruce lived around Banff. He's got a towing business in Banff, and he has a quarter horse ranch out at Sundry, and when he lived on Jameson Road, that's how I got to meet Bruce. And then, of course, yeah, Joe, we lost you.
Hey, well, what a coincidence. We lost you. Um, so if you go back to that email, maybe just try to rejoin.
Okay. Waiting for host to accept.
All right, we just accepted you, so I'm gonna hang up and hopefully I can talk you on here.
There he is. Welcome back.
There he is, man of the hour.
Good to see you guys
Joe
again.
asked you a question, and then it was silent when you started talking, and we waited for a while. And I said, Joe, I think he probably answered your question, but I don't think we heard it. So we'll just act like it's normal, and then we'll edit that sucker right in.
Yeah, I can re-ask you the question if that helps too.
Let's do that.
So I was telling you, my understanding was, Bruce was your neighbor, came over, helped you with the plumbing, but then when you met Peter, was he living in the States at the time?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was living down in Wyoming, Wheatland, Wyoming at the time. And they had, I don't know what year he moved into that ranch, but he'd only been living there a couple of years, I think. I'd have to ask Bruce about that again, and he was in California before that, right? So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
So
I think he was at that ranch 20 years probably.
was he coming up to your part of the woods? I know you said you were hosting clinics, but were you having to travel quite a bit to go to his clinics, or was he hitting Canada pretty good at that time?
Yeah, he was all over Canada. We'd go out to Kelowna, BC, or Cochrane, or he had some that he did east of here. I would go to out at Jensen, and then on the way through, he'd stop here and do a clinic here at my place. Yeah, so just wherever he'd call, I'd just go, jump in the truck and go.
Yeah. That's
I'm
awesome.
glad you re-asked that, Joe, because that was a much better answer and a much better question than last time. It was much tighter. It was very clear, very concise.
Yeah.
When you get to practice,
That's the key. That's what we've been talking about, right? Reps, and practice, and taking your time. So.
Yeah, so I was pretty blessed to be able to have him do a clinic here. The first one he did here, it was on like a Wednesday, and he was just going through, and I said, well, what if I put together some people and we just do a day clinic here on your way through? He said, yeah, let's do it. And heck, we had like 20 people show up, and it was a real good clinic. We practiced, we roped. He did a roping clinic, and we did a little bit of horsemanship, and it all kind of commingled together. And we just spent all day roping and working horses and having fun. And that's how that got started. And then after that, every year I would host a clinic for him, 3 or 4 day clinic. Yeah, that's how it would get going.
So let me ask you this, Luke, and this is a thought I had, and I guess I should preface this by saying I don't really know anything about ranch roping, like any sort of roping. Really, I'm very novice at it, and I don't really know much about like ranch roping competitions at all. But you were talking earlier about having your horses really prepared for your competitions, right? And I totally understand that. I'm definitely someone who I'm big on preparing as much as possible for whatever you're going to do in life, because that's kind of how you set yourself up for success. Part of that, though, is, for example, we were talking to, on the podcast, we had Joe Walter, and he was talking about his show career, and he was talking about the Elko County Fair and showing in those classes, and there were some cowboys around him that were saying, well, I wouldn't want to go to the fair and compete until I had a horse that I knew could win. And he said, well, if you do that, you're going to be waiting your whole life, because you're never going to be able to make a horse that can win until you've gone and done it. So I'm totally with you that you need to prepare as much as possible and need to have your horse in a good spot. Um, but don't you think there's part of it there that you also need, like you got to be in the game. You got to be learning how to do that, because I'm sure even with the ranch roping competitions, being at home in the pen versus, hauling a couple hours and then going, and you have spectators and you're in a different arena and stuff like that. Like, you and the horse kind of have to learn that process too, don't you think? And so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, because my personal opinion is, yeah, you got to prepare as much as possible, but you can't do that. You can't have that philosophy so hard and fast to the detriment that you never leave the farm or never leave the ranch.
Well, there's no substitute for it, right? All you can do is understand what you're getting yourself into and prepare yourself for that the best you can. So, whether it means setting up scenarios where you have other guys come and show up and help you, so that when you get to putting your horse on the hot seat, you're going to know how it's going to behave. I believe in preparing your horse for sure to get him ready for these jobs. But you're right, there's no substitute for the actual event. And you're not going to be right on the first time when you go, and you may not win it. That's a given. But your responsibility is to put yourself in the scenario before you go the best you can to help what you think the horse is going to find trouble with, and work on those little areas so that when you do go, you got at least a good idea of maybe what you would do to help that horse make it, rather it be slow down on that corner or approach it in a way that you know your horse can handle it, or you know, just being able to read the situation and fit the situation. Now, you're not going to be able to do all of that at home and get it all right, but you have a good understanding of what your horse is capable of. And you have a good understanding of what you think you can do with your horse through them kind of pressured up moments. And yeah, it may not shape up the way you want it to, and there's going to be time where you're going to have to go to the show. But the more prepared you are and the more things you put your horse through, and you know what you're going to be getting into, especially if you've been there with other horses before, you kind of have an idea of what you need to work at with your horse and where there's going to be problems and where you need to get your horse smooth and how you need to approach it. So I really believe in doing homework. I believe in really putting the time in to really evaluate all the different scenarios you'll be in before you go. You'll have a better chance. But yeah, there's a time where you have to go, and you have to show up for the show. And there's no substitute for it really, because it's a whole different scenario, right? But at least you'll know that you can trust your horse to make it through the trouble and get through it, because you put yourself in those scenarios in a lower level to really get to figuring it out. Like, I wouldn't go to one unless I had my horse working at these things pretty good. And I wouldn't, I don't like to go to these ropings to do a horse or a colt starting. I like to go there and rope. So I'll take my good, horses that I know are solid, and you can pretty well weather any storm, you know, because you can move them hindquarters enough to get out of trouble, or you can move your horse in a way that it won't get braced up and wait for trouble. You can ride out of that and get out of that. I think that's real important when it comes to that kind of thing, to keep you out of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's going to be scenarios that surface.
yeah. And you make a good point too. Like, I bet now when you go to these ropings, your horses are a lot more prepared than maybe 10 years ago when you were going to ropings, you know? And
For sure.
part of that is, you know what goes into preparing a horse for that situation because you've been in that situation more often. And you've just had
Yeah,
more reps of, well, now this can go wrong. Oh, and also this could go wrong. And then also this could go wrong. And so, like, you probably drive home from the ropings thinking, like, oh, well, next horse I bring along, they're going to be ready for that sticky situation we got in, or, you know, something like that. So,
absolutely. Because the first roping I went down to at San Ynez, I had a real nice little mare I thought was working pretty good until we got into a pressured situation like that in front of all those people and announcers and people yelling and hollering and cheering on and whatnot. That horse would really get bothered, and be really troubled. And I roped a calf and I dallied, and that horse just reared up straight up in the air. And the reason it did that because I couldn't step them hindquarters back. Didn't have them hindquarters operating. So I was like, boy, that really surfaced right there. So there's something you need to work on. And of course, Peter was watching. He'd tell me where I needed to work on these horses a little more to get them so that they're better prepared. And, I've been to, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them or whatever now, them pro-ams down there. And then we go to some ropings here now to try to build up the confidence and prepare a little better for those bigger shows. And now when I ride in there with these horses, I mean, they're ready to do a job. I don't have to worry about training on my horse or working on my horse. I know it's going to be there and solid. And I can just focus on the roping. So that changed a lot of things for me. Where I couldn't rope very good, I'd just conventional rope because I was worried how my horse was going to behave. Or I didn't, get my horse to, if it flung his head up, I would think about what other people were thinking watching. But eventually you have to learn that, it takes these rough experiences. It takes these, these time out of these shows to really get you to understand what to work at, to prepare yourself for the next one. So yeah, there's a time where you're going to have to just jump in with both feet and see what happens. But over time, you start to understand what you need to get right before you even go to one.
Well, Luke, we better wrap this podcast up pretty soon.
So,
but I got one more question I want to ask you. This is pretty unrelated to some of the stuff we've been talking about.
Yes, sir.
But you're in Canada, and most of us are all aware that, Canada's had some sort of political and upheaval over the last couple of years. And, we have a Canadian rancher on the line. Could you give us a little report what life looks like from your end and how those impacts have affected you and others like you, and just sort of how it's going up there? Well, how
In
the
the political
politics
world?
and economics and decisions being made in Ottawa and whatnot have affected your actual life and, the livelihood of your family and your ranch on a ground level.
Well, it's been real tough. I'll be honest with you. Everything's gone up in price. For haying equipment, fuel, infrastructure costs, just to buy a fence post or some barbed wire. Everything's doubled in price. But the cattle market wasn't changing. We spent 2 years there where we got beat up pretty good because everything went up so high, but the cattle prices didn't change. So it really sucked the life out of a lot of these guys with cattle, and they just simply had to get out, had enough of it. The older generation is not really passing it down to the kids because the kids don't want none of it. They don't see a future in it. It's too cost prohibitive to buy a cow herd, buy land. Unless you have it, have some kind of background to start with and a little help, you're not going to make it in the cattle business. You just will not. It's just too costly. Farmers are tearing up grassland and putting canola in because there's big money in it. The big farmers are getting bigger and squeezing out the little guys. The little guys can't pass it down to the kids because there's no money into it. So they sell it out to the big farmers, and pretty soon, it's just going to be a corporate world. And this year was the first year where we're starting to see some decent cattle prices, and it's starting to give people some hope. But it's been a tough grind, and something's got to change, or otherwise you won't see cattle producers. You won't see small time cattle producers. It'll get big and corporate, and that'll be it. So yeah, it's been a tough business, but this whole cattle industry needs to be reconstructed, and I think there's some people in the right place starting to work on that a little bit, but we got a long way to go yet, and there's a lot of people that'll be digging their way out for a while.
I imagine there's a significant outcry from people who are being impacted, like yourself and truckers, and like I remember seeing the trucker convoy down here in the States, seeing that on the internet and thinking, wow, now there's some Canadians.
Right.
I was real proud to be half Canadian. I was like, now there's some guys doing something. But you know what's crazy is
really
but the majority
of
of people
plate.
down here, you talk to folks in Georgia, they never even heard about that. All that effort those people put in, half the people you talk to down here are like, what trucker convoy? What protest? What people that are suffering? Canada's just where they drink tea and they're polite and don't have billboards.
Well, that's all right. Our prime minister wasn't listening either.
So,
right, all he had to do was come out and talk to the people and help them understand or make the right decisions, and they all would have went home. But they had to make a big deal out of it and get the Emergency Act, and it just caused more problems, And for me to get into politics, I just get upset. But I, because I got my views, and for what I see, it's not going in a very good direction. And so something's got to change.
Well, I guess that could be kind of unfruitful to get into politics a lot of times. But on another level, you got to take care of your family, right? And you got to take care of your horses and your whatever business you're running. You have to make steps in that direction as well to fortify your own little domain. Yeah. And so, we definitely, I know our thoughts are with the Canadians a lot because we see what's happening up there. And then, the same thing's creeping in down here. And we have laws and bills being passed all the time where they don't like the idea of a freelancer. And like the beginning of this podcast, you said, I haven't worked for somebody in 15 years. Right. There's people in our country, they'd like to have nobody say that eventually, where we all work for some, one of the big 10 or something conglomerates that run people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, from the more you research and the more you read, the more you get bothered about their agenda and where they want to go with it. And, it's worrisome. So I just hope there's somebody gonna step up to the plate and make a change somewhere. Will they? I don't know. Yeah. Politics is a dirty business.
Very interesting, but we're certainly watching, seeing what happens. But
I mean, if I have to go back to horse and buggy and just riding horses around everywhere, that won't bother me much. But it won't be as productive either.
Yeah, probably less podcasts over the internet will be going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, it was really good visiting with you guys.
Thank you so much for coming on.
We appreciate you.
I hope maybe.
Yeah. Thanks for making time for us.
I hope
Luke.
you guys can come up and visit me someday.
I'd love to.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
All righty, Luke. Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah, that'd be good. And sit up there and see your cabins. And we cleared that little piece of land down here. We had a double wide trailer on. And we still tell people we got rid of the double wide trailer
Okay.
because our friend in Canada, Luke Ferrari, is going to build a cabin someday and bring it down here to us. So, no pressure. Yeah.
Just waiting for Billy Muddy to call.
Probably that kind of thing precedes a little cash, probably kind of precedes the cabin coming down here, I would imagine. But anyhow, Luke. Yeah.
That'd be tough.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. And then again, folks, if you haven't done it already, go check out On the Move on Instagram and on Facebook, because that will help you stay updated with all the latest episodes of the podcast as they come out. And if you're looking for a horse and you're out there in Canada and you're kind of a good horseman and you're not going to tick Luke off, get in touch with him. He might have one he can sell you or help you learn how to ride yours a little bit better. And the rest of you guys, take care.
Okay, adios.